Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe YouTube channel. We are so happy to have you with us today for another deep and engaging conversation. This is not just any podcast. It is a space where we sit together, think together, and explore some of the biggest questions shaping our world. And today, we are going to explore one of the most important and difficult questions in international politics. Who controls the Middle East? Is it Washington, Moscow, or Tehran?
That's right, Adam. The Middle East is one of the most strategic and contested regions in the entire world. It is not only rich in oil and gas, but it is also the heart of global trade routes, the home of ancient civilizations, and the center of many religious traditions. For decades, world powers have competed for influence here, and the choices they make affect not only the region itself, but also global peace, energy markets, and security.
Before we go deeper into this discussion, dear listeners, let me take a moment to thank each of you for supporting the English Globe. If you enjoy these conversations, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. We would also love to hear from you directly in the comments. Tell us where you are listening from, whether it is the United States, the Middle East itself, Europe, Asia, Africa, or anywhere else around the globe.
And not only tell us where you are tuning in from, but also share your own thoughts on today's topic. Do you believe Washington still holds the strongest influence over the Middle East? Or do you see Moscow's recent moves as a sign of growing power? Or perhaps you think Tehran has changed the balance with its networks of influence and its bold defiance of Western pressure. Your opinions matter, and by sharing them, you become part of this global conversation.
Now let us take a closer look at why this question is so important today. If we turn on the news at any given moment, we see the Middle East at the center of world attention. Wars in Syria and Yemen, tensions in the Persian Gulf, peace talks between Israel and Arab states, and global struggles over oil prices. All of these are linked to the bigger question of who actually sets the rules in this region.
Yes, and what makes this topic so fascinating is that it is not a simple matter of one country holding all the power. Instead, it is like a chessboard with many pieces moving at the same time. Washington, Moscow, and Tehran each have their own strategies, their own allies, and their own weaknesses. And behind them are millions of people who live with the consequences of these power struggles. Ordinary families, students, workers, and communities who just want peace and stability.
If we look back at history, we see that the Middle East has always been a space of competition. Empires came and went, and each one tried to control its trade routes and resources. But in the modern world, the competition became sharper with the rise of oil as the lifeblood of global economies. Whoever influenced the Middle East had an advantage over the rest of the world. That is why the question of control is not just about the region, but about the balance of power across the entire globe.
And let's not forget, dear listeners, that the Middle East is also about identity, religion, and culture. It is where Islam, Christianity, and Judaism all have deep roots. It is where history feels alive every single day. So when Washington, Moscow, or Tehran act in this region, they are not only dealing with politics and oil, they are also touching the lives of people with strong traditions, powerful beliefs, and deep memories of past foreign interventions.
This makes the region not only strategic, but also very sensitive. A decision made in Washington can spark protests in the streets of Baghdad. A move by Moscow in Syria can shift alliances across the region, and actions by Tehran can bring both admiration from its allies and fear from its rivals. The Middle East is like a mirror of global politics, showing us how power, culture, and resistance play out in the modern world.
So, dear listeners, as we move through this discussion, we want you to think about this question with us. Is it really possible for one country to control the Middle East? Or is it more realistic to say that the region is always shared between powers, sometimes balanced, sometimes unstable, and always changing? By the end of this podcast, we will reflect on whether Washington, Moscow, or Tehran truly holds the upper hand, or if no one does.
Remember to leave your ideas in the comment section. Who do you think is the strongest player in the Middle East today? Washington with its military bases and global alliances? Moscow with its bold moves in Syria and partnerships with regional leaders? Or Tehran with its revolutionary message, proxy networks, and resilience under sanctions? We are excited to read your insights and build a community of global learners here on the English Globe.
This is why today's topic is not just another headline. It is about the forces that shape our present and our future. Understanding who controls, or tries to control, the Middle East gives us a window into how international politics really works. And that, dear listeners, is why we are diving deep into this subject together today.
To understand who controls the Middle East today, we first need to look back at history, because the roots of power in this region go deep. In the early 20th century, the Middle East was not divided as we know it now. Much of the land was part of the Ottoman Empire, which collapsed after World War I. When the empire fell, European colonial powers, especially Britain and France, moved in to shape the region's future. And this moment was crucial, because it was the beginning of modern political borders and outside influence.
Yes, Adam. And one of the most famous examples of this foreign interference was the Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916. This secret deal between Britain and France divided the Middle East into spheres of influence even before the war was over. The local people were not consulted. Instead, lines were drawn on maps by European officials who wanted to protect their interests. This decision created borders that did not always match the ethnic, tribal, or religious realities on the ground, and that legacy continues to shape conflicts in the region even today.
Exactly. After World War I, Britain took control of places like Iraq, Palestine, and Jordan, while France controlled Syria and Lebanon. These mandates, as they were called, were supposed to prepare the local people for independence, but in reality, they were tools of colonial domination. Britain, for example, was very interested in controlling the oil of Iraq and maintaining access to trade routes through the Suez Canal. The Middle East quickly became a stage where outside powers played their own games while the local population struggled for self-determination.
And this is where we see the beginning of mistrust between the people of the region and Western powers. Promises were made to Arab leaders during the war about independence, but those promises were broken when Britain and France divided the land. This sense of betrayal left a lasting wound. Even today, when Western countries intervene in the Middle East, many people remember these historical moments and see a pattern of outsiders acting for their own benefit rather than respecting local voices.
Fast forward to the mid-20th century, and the situation becomes even more complex. After World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union emerged as the two superpowers of the world, and the Middle East became one of the main arenas of the Cold War. Washington wanted to protect access to oil, defend allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia, and stop the spread of communism. Moscow, on the other hand, wanted to gain influence by supporting Arab nationalist movements and governments that opposed Western domination.
Yes, the Cold War really shaped the alignments of the region. Countries like Egypt under Nasser, Syria, and later Iraq often turned to Moscow for support. The Soviet Union provided weapons, military training, and political backing. Meanwhile, the United States strengthened its alliances with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other Gulf monarchies. This rivalry often turned the Middle East into a chessboard, where Washington and Moscow made moves not only against each other, but also over the lives of millions of people in the region.
One of the clearest examples of this was the Arab-Israeli conflict. The United States consistently supported Israel, while the Soviet Union supported many Arab states. The wars of 1967 and 1973, for example, were not only regional conflicts, but also moments when Washington and Moscow tested their power and influence indirectly. This was a dangerous game, because the Middle East could have easily become a flashpoint for global war, but it also shows just how central the region was in the global struggle between the two superpowers.
And let's not forget the importance of oil during this time. In 1973, Arab oil producers used the so-called oil weapon by placing an embargo on exports to the United States and other Western nations that supported Israel during the Yom Kippur War. This caused a massive energy crisis in the West and showed just how much power the Middle East held. But it also showed why both Washington and Moscow would never ignore this region. Whoever had good relations with Middle Eastern oil producers could shift the global economy.
Then came one of the biggest turning points in the history of the region, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. Until then, Iran had been a close ally of Washington, under the Shah, who was supported by American power. But when the revolution succeeded, the Shah was overthrown, and the Islamic Republic of Iran was born under Ayatollah Khomeini. This was not just a change of government, it was a complete transformation that challenged both the United States and the Soviet Union.
That's true, Adam. The Iranian Revolution created a third force in the Middle East, separate from Washington and Moscow. The new Islamic Republic rejected Western influence and also distrusted Soviet communism because it was seen as atheistic. Instead, Iran developed its own ideology, based on Islamic principles, resistance to imperialism, and a mission to export its revolution across the region. This suddenly changed the balance of power, because now there was a player who was not part of the Cold War system, but still had enormous regional influence.
Yes, and the revolution immediately brought conflict with Washington, most famously in the hostage crisis, where American diplomats were held in Tehran for over a year. Relations between the two countries collapsed, and the United States lost one of its strongest allies in the region. At the same time, Iran began building networks of influence in Lebanon, Iraq, and later in other places, creating a challenge to both Western powers and regional rivals like Saudi Arabia.
And while Moscow thought it might benefit from Washington's loss, it too discovered that Iran was not going to be a simple partner. Iran opposed communism on ideological grounds and did not want to become dependent on the Soviet Union. So what we saw after 1979 was the emergence of a triangular struggle. Washington still had its allies, Moscow was trying to keep influence, but Tehran was rising as a revolutionary power with its own agenda.
This is why the historical roots are so important. The colonial period created borders and mistrust. The Cold War turned the Middle East into a battlefield of superpower rivalry, and the Iranian Revolution introduced a new actor that could not be controlled by either Washington or Moscow. Understanding this background helps us see why the question of control today is so complicated. It is not simply about military power or oil. It is about history, ideology, and the memories of past interventions.
Exactly. When we ask today, who controls the Middle East, we cannot ignore these historical layers. The ghosts of Sykes-Picot, the Cold War rivalries, and the Iranian Revolution all live on in the decisions of governments, the anger of local populations, and the alliances that shape the region. Without this context, we cannot understand why Washington, Moscow, and Tehran still struggle for influence, and why no one has been able to achieve complete control.
When we look at the Middle East today, Washington's influence is visible almost everywhere. One of the clearest signs of this power is the U.S. military presence across the region. From the Persian Gulf to the Eastern Mediterranean, the United States has built a vast network of bases, airfields, and naval facilities. These installations are not only defensive, but also symbolic. They remind every actor in the region that the American military can project force quickly and on a massive scale.
That's right, Adam. Think about the U.S. Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain. It plays a central role in patrolling the waters of the Persian Gulf, ensuring that oil shipments pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. one of the most vital choke points for global energy. This is not just about local security. It is about protecting the lifeline of the world economy. If those waters were blocked, oil prices would skyrocket, and economies around the world would feel the shock. Washington understands this, and so do its rivals.
And beyond Bahrain, the U.S. has a presence in Qatar, where the Al Udeid Air Base serves as a key hub for operations across the region. It also has facilities in Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, and even maintains troops in places like Iraq and Syria. Each of these positions allows Washington to move quickly in times of crisis. Whether it is launching air campaigns, protecting allies, or responding to threats, the U.S. network of bases gives it unmatched mobility and reach compared to any other external power.
But Washington's power in the Middle East is not only about bases and troops, it is also about alliances, some of which are among the most durable and controversial in modern history. Take Israel, for example. Since its founding in 1948, Israel has been the strongest U.S. ally in the region. Washington provides billions of dollars in military aid each year, ensures Israel's security with advanced technology like the Iron Dome missile defense system, and consistently supports it in international forums. This alliance is central to America's regional strategy.
Another crucial partner for Washington is Saudi Arabia. The relationship goes back to the 1940s, built on an exchange of oil for security. While the two countries have had disagreements, particularly on issues like human rights and the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the strategic bond remains strong. The United States relies on Saudi Arabia as a leader in OPEC and a counterbalance to Iran, while Saudi Arabia relies on American weapons and protection against regional threats. This partnership remains one of the cornerstones of U.S. power in the Gulf.
And let's not forget the smaller Gulf states, such as the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Kuwait. These nations also rely heavily on Washington for security guarantees. They purchase advanced American weapons, train with U.S. forces, and benefit from defense agreements that give them a sense of protection against larger regional rivals. In return, the U.S. strengthens its position by having partners who host bases and cooperate on intelligence sharing. This web of alliances makes Washington's footprint wider than any other outside power.
Of course, military power and alliances are only part of the story. Washington also uses economic tools to extend its influence. One of the most powerful weapons in the American toolkit is sanctions. Over the years, the U.S. has placed sanctions on countries like Iran, Syria, and even individuals or organizations it considers dangerous. These sanctions often target banking systems, oil exports, and key industries, making it difficult for targeted states to operate in the global economy. This pressure has reshaped the choices of many governments.
Yes, and sanctions are not the only economic tool. The U.S. also provides aid to allies, not just in military form, but also in economic assistance. Egypt, for example, receives billions of dollars in aid each year, which supports its government and military. Jordan is another major recipient, with Washington providing financial support to keep stability in a country that borders both Israel and Syria. These aid programs are not acts of charity. They are deliberate investments in keeping allies loyal and ensuring that American interests remain protected.
Technology is another area where Washington maintains dominance. The U.S. leads the world in advanced military systems, surveillance technology, and cyber capabilities. Many Middle Eastern states rely on American technology for their defense. Whether it is fighter jets, missile defense systems, or intelligence equipment, Washington holds a key advantage. This creates dependency, because once a country buys U.S. systems, it relies on American maintenance, spare parts, and upgrades. In this way, technology becomes a long-term bond that ties allies closely to Washington.
And the influence of American technology goes beyond the military. Think about the role of US companies in areas like oil production, infrastructure, and digital communications. American firms have been deeply involved in the Gulf economies, building energy systems and bringing investment. On top of that, the cultural influence of the United States, through media, technology platforms, and education, shapes the views of younger generations in the region. Many students from the Middle East study in American universities, creating networks of influence that last for decades.
When we put all of this together, we see a very clear picture of Washington's footprint in the Middle East. It is a mix of hard power, through military bases and alliances, and soft power, through economic influence, technology, and culture. No other external power has the same level of presence or depth. Moscow may have made gains in Syria, and Tehran has built regional networks, but the scale of American influence is still unmatched in terms of reach and resources.
But at the same time, Adam, this presence comes with costs. Many people in the region view Washington not as a protector, but as an intervener. The US invasion of Iraq in 2003, for example, left deep scars and led to years of instability. American support for certain governments is often criticized as ignoring human rights or democratic values. So while Washington's footprint is strong, it is also controversial. And this tension is part of what makes the Middle East such a complex and contested space.
Absolutely. The United States walks a fine line in the region. On one hand, it has unmatched power and influence through its military, economic, and cultural reach. On the other hand, it faces resentment, opposition, and challenges from both rivals and some of its own allies. This combination means that Washington is powerful, but not unchallenged. The Middle East is not a space that can be controlled easily, even with all the tools the US brings to the table. When we shift our attention from Washington to Moscow, the story of Russia's role in the Middle East is fascinating. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union sought to challenge the United States wherever possible, and the Middle East became one of the main battlegrounds of influence. Moscow reached out to Arab nationalist leaders, supported socialist movements, and offered an alternative model of power to Western-backed monarchies. For decades, the Soviet Union tried to present itself as the champion of anti-colonial struggles.
That's right, Adam. Leaders like Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt became symbols of this connection. Nasser turned to the Soviet Union for military equipment, training, and political support when he clashed with Western powers over issues like the Suez Canal. Syria and Iraq also developed close ties with Moscow, receiving weapons and backing for their governments. The Soviet strategy was to position itself as the friend of Arab states who felt betrayed or pressured by the West, especially after colonial manipulation and repeated conflicts with Israel.
The Soviet Union also invested heavily in building cultural and educational links. Thousands of Arab students studied in Moscow, and military officers were trained by Soviet advisors. At the same time, the USSR supplied large amounts of arms, ranging from tanks to fighter jets, often at low cost or even free to allies. These moves created a sense of loyalty and dependency. Arab militaries became used to Soviet systems, and governments saw Moscow as a partner that would not demand the same political conditions as Washington.
But despite these successes, the Soviet Union also faced limits. The 1973 Yom Kippur War is a clear example. While Moscow supported Egypt and Syria, it was Washington that managed to turn the situation into an advantage. After the war, US diplomacy led by Henry Kissinger brought Egypt closer to the United States and eventually to the Camp David Accords with Israel. This was a huge setback for Moscow because losing Egypt meant losing one of the most important Arab powers in the region.
Then came the 1980s, when Moscow faced even greater challenges. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 was meant to secure influence on the region's edge, but it turned into a costly war that drained resources and damaged the Soviet image. The United States and its allies supported the Afghan resistance, and Moscow was eventually forced to withdraw. At the same time, the Iranian Revolution made it clear that Moscow was not the only challenger to Washington. Tehran pursued its own independent path, limiting Soviet ambitions.
By the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia almost disappeared from the Middle East stage. The new Russian Federation under Boris Yeltsin had neither the resources nor the political stability to project power abroad. The United States became the undisputed external power in the region, especially after the Gulf War of 1991. Moscow was too busy with its domestic crises, economic reforms, and internal struggles to think seriously about competing in the Middle East. Many people thought Russia would never return.
But then came the rise of Vladimir Putin in the early 2000s. Putin rebuilt the Russian state, restored its confidence, and began looking outward once again. For him, the Middle East was a place where Russia could regain its lost status as a global power. Step by step, Moscow rebuilt ties with traditional partners, resumed arms sales, and positioned itself as a player willing to talk to everyone, including governments that Washington criticized or sanctioned. This was a smart strategy of filling the gaps left by U.S. policy.
And the defining moment of Russia's return was its intervention in Syria in 2015. When the Assad government faced collapse during the Syrian civil war, Moscow stepped in with air power, advisors, and weapons. This intervention completely changed the course of the conflict. Assad survived, and Russia proved that it could act decisively while the United States hesitated. For many observers, this was the moment when Moscow announced that it was back as a serious power in the Middle East, capable of shaping outcomes on the ground.
Russia's role in Syria also gave Moscow new influence over regional diplomacy. By working with Iran and Turkey in the so-called Astana process, Moscow showed that it could bring together actors who often had competing interests. At the same time, Russia managed to talk with Israel, Saudi Arabia, and even the United States, positioning itself as a balancing force. This ability to maintain relationships with rival powers is one of the reasons Moscow has been able to expand its footprint without the vast resources that Washington uses.
Another major element of Moscow's strategy is arms sales. Russia is the world's second-largest exporter of weapons, and the Middle East is one of its biggest markets. Countries like Egypt, Algeria, and even Gulf states have purchased Russian systems, sometimes as a way to diversify away from US dependence. Advanced systems like the S-400 air defense have become symbols of Russian technological strength. These sales not only bring money, but also build long-term influence, since buyers must rely on Russian training and maintenance.
Energy diplomacy is also part of the story. Russia is a major oil and gas power, and through coordination with OPEC, particularly Saudi Arabia, Moscow has gained new influence over global energy prices. This partnership, known as OPEC+, shows how Russia can work with traditional U.S. allies when interests align. By cooperating with Gulf states on production cuts or increases, Moscow strengthens its role as a global energy player and ensures it cannot be ignored in the Middle East's oil-centered economy.
But Moscow's approach is not without limits. Russia does not have the same economic strength as the United States, and its global network of bases is much smaller. Its intervention in Syria was significant, but it also stretched its resources. Moreover, many in the region see Russia as a useful partner, but not necessarily a trusted friend. Moscow is often transactional, focusing on deals and opportunities rather than building long-term commitments. This makes its influence real, but not always as deep as Washington's.
That's true. Yet despite these limits, Russia has been able to position itself as an indispensable player. It has taken advantage of moments when Washington pulled back or when regional states sought alternatives to U.S. dominance. Moscow's message is clear. It does not lecture allies on human rights. It does not push for political reforms, and it is willing to deal with anyone. For some governments in the Middle East, This pragmatic approach makes Russia a very attractive partner.
So when we talk about Moscow's footprint, we see a story of rise, fall, and return. The Soviet Union once competed fiercely with Washington, then collapsed and disappeared from the scene, only for Russia under Putin to re-emerge through clever strategy and bold military action. Syria is the most visible example, but behind it are arms sales, energy deals, and diplomatic balancing acts. Russia may not control the Middle East, but it has ensured that no discussion about the region can ignore its presence.
Exactly, Julia. And this sets the stage for the broader competition we are analyzing. Washington has the strongest footprint in terms of military and economic resources. Moscow, however, has made a dramatic return, proving it can shape outcomes even with fewer resources. And then there is Tehran, the revolutionary actor that has built its own networks of influence. Understanding Moscow's path helps us see how the Middle East has become a three-way contest, not just a U.S.-dominated arena.
When we talk about Iran, we must start with the 1979 Islamic Revolution, which transformed the country and reshaped the Middle East. The revolution was not just about overthrowing the Shah. It was about creating a new ideological framework based on Islamic principles, independence, and resistance to foreign domination. Tehran positioned itself as a state with a mission to challenge Western influence and assert its authority regionally. This revolutionary ideology emphasized self-reliance, sovereignty, and the spread of its political religious vision.
Yes, Adam, and Tehran's influence is not limited to its borders. Over the decades, Iran has built a network of allies and proxies across the region, creating what is often called the Shia Crescent. This corridor stretches from Iran through Iraq into Syria and reaches Lebanon on the Mediterranean coast, with influence extending even to Yemen through the Houthis. These connections are not accidental, they are strategic. By supporting allied groups, Tehran gains leverage in countries where direct control is impossible, projecting power and shaping regional politics.
Iran's revolutionary approach also means it invests heavily in ideology and culture alongside military and political influence. It provides financial aid, religious guidance, and strategic support to its partners. Hezbollah in Lebanon, for instance, is not only a political organization, but also a powerful military force backed and trained by Iran. Similarly, Shia militias in Iraq receive training, funding, and coordination. By exporting influence through these proxies, Tehran extends its reach without needing a permanent occupation, creating a network that acts in its interest across multiple states simultaneously.
Exactly, Adam. The Shia Crescent allows Iran to shape regional dynamics even while facing heavy international pressure. In Syria, Iran has been instrumental in sustaining the Assad government, providing military advisors, fighters, and financial support. In Iraq, it maintains strong ties with influential political parties and militias. In Lebanon, Hezbollah operates almost as a state within a state, with Iranian funding and strategic direction. Even in Yemen, the Houthis represent Iran's ability to influence conflicts far from its borders, demonstrating a blend of ideology, strategy, and opportunism.
But projecting influence is not easy, especially under sanctions. Tehran has faced decades of economic pressure from the United States and its allies, including restrictions on banking, trade, and oil exports. Yet Iran has found ways to survive. It has developed informal trade networks, cultivated alliances with countries like China and Russia, and invested in domestic self-sufficiency in key industries. This ability to navigate sanctions while continuing to exert influence is a hallmark of Tehran's strategy. It demonstrates resilience, patience, and a long-term vision for regional power.
And Tehran's strategy is not just defensive, it is also political. By supporting proxy groups, Iran gains leverage over governments that might otherwise act independently. This influence allows it to affect decisions in Iraq's parliament, sway political negotiations in Lebanon, and even challenge Saudi policies in Yemen. The ideological component, resistance to Western dominance, adds legitimacy to its interventions. By portraying itself as a defender of oppressed Shia communities, Tehran combines soft power, religion, and strategy in a way that complicates the calculations of its rivals.
Another critical aspect is Tehran's relationship with non-state actors. Unlike Washington or Moscow, Iran often relies on proxies rather than conventional deployments. This approach is cost-effective and deniable, allowing it to influence events while avoiding direct confrontation. At the same time, it creates dependency. Groups like Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, and Houthi rebels rely on Iranian guidance, funding, and weapons, meaning Tehran's regional influence grows with every conflict these groups are involved in. This networked approach is a key difference from other powers in the region.
Yes, Adam, but this strategy also comes with risks. Supporting multiple proxies across different countries can create tensions with local populations, rival governments, and international actors. Iran must constantly balance its ideological ambitions with political pragmatism, ensuring that its partners remain loyal and that its interventions do not provoke overwhelming retaliation. Despite these challenges, Tehran has managed to remain a central player in Middle Eastern politics, showing that influence is not only about military might, but also about resilience, networks, and strategy.
In summary, Tehran's role in the Middle East today is defined by its revolutionary ideology, its use of proxies across the Shia crescent, and its to survive under sanctions while building influence. Unlike Washington, which relies on conventional bases, or Moscow, which combines diplomacy with military intervention, Iran uses ideology, religion, and strategic alliances to extend power. It is a patient and adaptive actor, capable of influencing events far beyond its borders without direct occupation.
Exactly. Tehran demonstrates that influence can be subtle, decentralized, and enduring. By exporting revolution, supporting allies, and maintaining resilience under pressure, Iran challenges both Washington and Moscow, ensuring that no single power dominates the Middle East. Understanding Tehran's strategy is essential to seeing the current balance of power and predicting how future conflicts and alliances might unfold. Its reach, adaptability, and ideological commitment make it a unique and formidable actor in regional politics.
One of the most striking features of Middle Eastern politics today is the prevalence of proxy wars. Instead of direct confrontation, major powers often use local actors to pursue their interests. Washington, Moscow, and Tehran all rely on partners to extend influence while minimizing direct risk. This strategy has shaped conflicts in Syria, Yemen, and Iraq, turning them into arenas where global and regional powers clash indirectly. The battlefield is local, but the stakes are international, making each skirmish part of a much larger geopolitical struggle.
Exactly, Adam. Take Syria as a case study. Moscow supports the Assad government. Iran provides military advisors and proxy militias, while the United States works with Kurdish forces and opposition groups. Each actor seeks to influence the outcome without deploying massive ground forces or risking direct confrontation. This triangular involvement has prolonged the conflict, increased civilian suffering, and made a political resolution far more complex. It also shows how interconnected local and global interests have become in the modern Middle East.
Yemen provides another example. Iran supports the Houthi rebels with weapons, training, and political backing, while Saudi Arabia leads a coalition supported by Washington through intelligence and arms sales. The war has devastated civilian populations, yet it continues because each side serves larger strategic goals. For Tehran, Yemen is part of a broader effort to challenge Saudi influence. For Washington and its allies, the conflict is about containing Iran's regional expansion. These proxy wars reflect a long-term struggle where local actors become instruments of great power competition.
Iraq also illustrates this dynamic. After the US invasion in 2003, multiple Shia militias gained power and developed strong ties with Tehran, influencing political decisions in Baghdad. At the same time, Washington has worked to maintain influence through economic aid, training, and limited military presence. Moscow, meanwhile, engages diplomatically and supplies some military hardware to certain factions. Iraq thus becomes a central theatre where all three powers, Washington, Moscow, and Tehran, interact indirectly, each seeking leverage over the country's future direction.
These conflicts highlight how modern warfare in the Middle East is often indirect. Instead of large-scale invasions, powers use proxy forces, arms transfers, financial support, and training to achieve objectives. This approach reduces their exposure to international criticism or domestic backlash while maintaining influence. It also allows for deniability, as interventions can be framed as local disputes rather than global power struggles. In practice, proxy wars extend influence efficiently, but they also make the region highly unstable and unpredictable.
The strategic calculus is complicated further by overlapping interests. Tehran may support a militia to secure its Shia crescent, while Washington may back another to counterbalance Iran. Moscow might supply arms or mediate agreements, seeking to maintain influence without direct engagement. The result is a multi-layered conflict environment where alliances shift, temporary partnerships form, and local actors navigate between competing external patrons. Each decision made by these powers has ripple effects across multiple states and conflicts.
Proxy wars also allow powers to test each other indirectly. For example, Iranian drones and missiles used by Houthis in Yemen occasionally target Saudi infrastructure, showing Tehran's reach without committing its own forces. Similarly, Washington uses airstrikes, intelligence, and special operations in Iraq and Syria to influence outcomes without full-scale occupation. Moscow's intervention in Syria served as a demonstration of military capability and diplomatic leverage. Each action sends messages not only to regional rivals but also to global competitors, shaping perceptions and alliances.
The economic aspect of proxy conflicts is equally important. Powers provide funding, weapons, and resources to allies to ensure loyalty. Sanctions on Iran, for instance, have not entirely prevented Tehran from sustaining its regional network. Meanwhile, US and Gulf states provide financial and material support to counterbalancing forces. These economic flows create dependencies, prolong conflicts, and incentivize local actors to align with external patrons. Proxy wars thus combine military, political, and financial tools into a single strategy for influence.
Another significant dimension is ideology. Tehran often frames its support for militias as a religious or revolutionary duty, whereas Washington emphasizes democracy, human rights, or counter-terrorism. Moscow, by contrast, often focuses on sovereignty, anti-Western rhetoric, and pragmatic alliances. Each power leverages narratives to justify involvement, maintain domestic support, and influence local populations. Ideology in this sense is both a tool for legitimacy and a way to mobilize allies across borders.
In conclusion, proxy wars have become a defining feature of Middle Eastern geopolitics. They allow Washington, Moscow, and Tehran to project power while limiting direct exposure, create long-term influence through local partners, and shape regional outcomes without formal occupation. However, this approach also produces instability, prolongs conflicts, and complicates diplomatic solutions. Understanding proxy wars is essential to understanding why no single power fully controls the Middle East, even as all three, Washington, Moscow, and Tehran, compete intensely for influence.
When discussing control of the Middle East, we cannot ignore oil and energy. The region holds a significant share of the world's proven reserves, which makes it a strategic prize for global powers. The United States, Russia, and Iran all use energy as a tool of influence. For Washington, ensuring the free flow of oil through the Persian Gulf and maintaining partnerships with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states is essential for global markets. Oil becomes both a resource and a form of geopolitical leverage.
Exactly, Adam. Tehran, despite sanctions, has also used oil strategically. Iran's exports provide revenue to support its domestic economy and fund regional activities. At times, Tehran has reduced shipments to influence global prices or respond to political pressures, signaling its importance in energy markets. Moreover, Iran uses relationships with neighboring countries to maintain oil trade, often circumventing sanctions through creative networks. This ability to leverage energy gives Iran influence beyond its borders.
Moscow, meanwhile, combines energy with diplomacy. Russia is one of the world's largest oil and gas producers, and it uses this position to engage Middle Eastern partners, especially Saudi Arabia, in the OPEC+ framework. By coordinating production levels, Moscow can influence global oil prices, indirectly affecting the economic stability of other regional players. This economic leverage strengthens Russia's political influence, allowing it to negotiate from a position of strength even with countries aligned with Washington.
Another key aspect is the security of shipping routes. The Strait of Hormuz, through which a significant portion of global oil passes, is critical. Washington has historically ensured its security with naval power, but Iran can threaten to disrupt this passage, giving it asymmetric leverage over global energy markets. Even a temporary closure or threat can send oil prices soaring and force diplomatic negotiations, illustrating how geography combined with energy resources creates strategic influence.
The Gulf Cooperation Council countries also depend heavily on oil exports for economic stability. For the United States, maintaining strong alliances with these states ensures access to energy and secures global supply chains. American military presence in the region, therefore, is not only about security in the narrow sense, but also about protecting energy flows. By supporting oil-rich allies, Washington indirectly ensures that its own domestic and international energy interests are safeguarded.
Meanwhile, Iran and Russia have leveraged energy as a bargaining tool. Iran's participation in regional energy markets, even under sanctions, allows it to signal power and resilience. Russia's oil diplomacy with Saudi Arabia demonstrates how energy can become a bridge even between rivals, coordinating policy to stabilize markets and project influence. Energy policy, therefore, is inseparable from political and military strategy, creating a multi-layered network of leverage that shapes decisions across the Middle East.
In addition to oil, natural gas is becoming increasingly significant. Russia uses gas as a global tool, and although most of its exports are to Europe and Asia, Moscow's energy expertise strengthens its position in Middle Eastern negotiations. Iran, with the world's second-largest natural gas reserves, similarly has potential leverage in long-term projects and regional partnerships. This adds another dimension to the competition, as control and influence are not only about oil pipelines, but also about energy infrastructure, trade agreements, and technological collaboration.
Sanctions, trade restrictions, and market fluctuations also highlight how energy resources intersect with politics. The United States has used sanctions on Iran to limit oil exports, attempting to constrain Tehran's economic and military power. In response, Iran finds alternative routes, barters, or partners willing to bypass restrictions. These interactions show that energy is not a static resource, but a dynamic instrument of policy, shaping alliances, influencing markets, and affecting the strategic calculations of every regional and global power.
Energy leverage also ties directly to domestic politics. In Gulf states, revenues from oil and gas support social programs and political stability. For Washington, maintaining these flows ensures that allies remain strong and dependent on U.S. security guarantees. For Tehran, revenues fund military and proxy networks that enhance regional influence. Moscow, through global oil diplomacy, can influence prices and indirectly pressure competitors. In all cases, energy is deeply intertwined with both economic power and political strategy.
Finally, energy is a lens through which we can understand broader strategic goals. It explains why Washington maintains a large military presence, why Moscow invests in alliances and OPEC+ coordination, and why Tehran prioritizes resilience under sanctions. Control of energy flows is not just about profit, it is about bargaining power, deterrence, and long-term influence. In this sense, oil and gas are central to the struggle for regional dominance and are among the most enduring tools of leverage in the Middle East.
In conclusion, energy resources in the Middle East provide each power, Washington, Moscow, and Tehran, with distinct forms of leverage. While the United States ensures global market stability, Iran uses energy strategically to resist pressure, and Russia combines exports with diplomacy to expand influence. Understanding oil, gas, and energy flows is essential to understanding the balance of power. In the Middle East, whoever controls or influences energy channels gains a key advantage in shaping regional and global outcomes. Diplomacy in the Middle East is as important as military or economic power. Washington has leveraged both to secure influence, using formal alliances and innovative agreements to shape regional alignments. A notable example is the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Arab states, including the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. These deals expanded Washington's strategic network, enhanced regional security cooperation, and provided opportunities for economic partnerships, demonstrating how diplomacy can extend influence without boots on the ground.
Exactly, Adam. At the same time, Moscow pursues its own form of diplomacy, often balancing relations among rivals. Russia maintains ties with Iran, supports Assad in Syria, and engages Turkey and several Arab states simultaneously. This balancing act allows Moscow to present itself as a neutral broker in conflicts, gaining leverage without committing fully to one side. By mediating negotiations, supplying weapons, and hosting talks, Moscow demonstrates that influence in the Middle East is not solely about military power, but also about strategic relationships and flexible diplomacy.
Washington's partnerships with Gulf states further illustrate the importance of diplomacy. Beyond military agreements, these alliances involve intelligence sharing, economic cooperation, and technological collaboration. Countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar benefit from U.S. support, while the United States secures long-term access to energy resources and strategic bases. These relationships are formalized through treaties, joint exercises, and high-level visits, creating a network of trust and interdependence that reinforces America's regional position and deters rivals from directly challenging its allies.
Meanwhile, Moscow uses diplomacy to shape regional outcomes without heavy military engagement. Its relationship with Turkey is a prime example. Although Ankara and Moscow have differing agendas in Syria, Libya, and the Caucasus, both sides coordinate through mechanisms like the Astana process. This pragmatic engagement allows Russia to maximize influence while minimizing conflict. Similarly, Moscow maintains channels with Arab states seeking alternatives to Washington, or those wary of US dominance. Russian diplomacy is often transactional, focusing on agreements that reinforce its strategic position while leaving room for flexibility.
Iran's approach is different but equally strategic. Tehran relies on partnerships with countries like China to counterbalance U.S. influence. China provides economic investment, technological cooperation, and political backing in international forums. These ties help Iran circumvent sanctions and maintain domestic stability. Tehran also uses its regional alliances with militias and sympathetic governments to strengthen its negotiating position. Diplomacy for Iran is inseparable from ideology and security concerns, blending formal agreements with informal networks of influence to challenge Western dominance in the region.
Another important aspect is the way these powers navigate shifting regional dynamics. Alliances are rarely permanent. Washington's relationships, for instance, are sometimes strained by policy disagreements, human rights concerns, or leadership changes in Gulf states. Moscow's flexibility allows it to exploit these shifts, offering itself as an alternative partner. Tehran adapts by cultivating new allies or deepening existing networks, demonstrating that influence in the Middle East is a dynamic contest, where power is exercised through both agreements and the ability to respond to changing circumstances.
The Abraham Accords also show how diplomacy can reshape regional perceptions. By fostering normalization between Israel and Arab states, Washington not only strengthens its allies but also isolates Iran diplomatically. This reshaping of alliances demonstrates that influence is not only about military might, but about changing regional calculations. These agreements also open opportunities for economic development, joint ventures, and technological collaboration, making them a form of soft power that complements traditional hard power approaches like military presence or sanctions.
Moscow's diplomatic approach similarly combines hard and soft power. By coordinating with Turkey, Iran, and Arab states, Russia can influence outcomes without deploying large numbers of troops. Its ability to mediate ceasefires, broker agreements, and supply weapons while remaining a neutral arbiter enhances its credibility. Moscow also uses economic incentives, energy cooperation, and arms sales as diplomatic tools, creating networks of dependency that increase its influence. Flexibility and pragmatism are central to Russia's strategy, allowing it to operate effectively despite limited resources compared to Washington.
Iran's diplomacy, meanwhile, leverages both regional and global partnerships. Tehran's ties with China strengthen its economic resilience, while its regional networks enhance political and military leverage. By coordinating with sympathetic governments and non-state actors, Tehran maintains influence even under heavy sanctions. Its diplomacy is often subtle, combining formal agreements, ideological alignment, and strategic support to allies. This multi-layered approach allows Iran to challenge U.S. and Western dominance, demonstrating that influence is not solely a function of military or economic superiority, but also strategic relationships and patience.
In conclusion, diplomacy and alliances are critical components of power in the Middle East. Washington uses formal agreements, the Abraham Accords, and partnerships with Gulf states to maintain influence. Moscow balances relationships with Turkey, Iran, and Arab states to maximize leverage. Tehran relies on China, regional networks, and ideological ties to assert power and resist Western pressure. Each power's approach demonstrates that influence is as much about relationships, negotiation, and strategy as it is about military or economic strength, shaping the complex and shifting landscape of the region.
As we wrap up this discussion, it is important to recognize Washington's enduring strengths. The United States maintains a vast network of alliances, cutting-edge military capabilities, economic leverage, and cultural influence that reaches the hearts and minds of many in the region. These advantages allow Washington to shape outcomes, secure energy flows, and project power over extended periods. Yet, despite this dominance, U.S. influence faces limitations, including resistance from local actors, rising regional competitors, and the unpredictability of alliances that can shift with political change.
Moscow's approach, while less conventional, has also yielded notable strategic gains. Russia has successfully balanced relations with diverse actors, from Turkey to Iran and Arab states, often positioning itself as a mediator and power broker. By leveraging military interventions, energy diplomacy, and media influence, Moscow has carved out a credible role that punches above its economic size. Its flexibility allows Russia to exploit opportunities as they arise, capitalizing on gaps created by other powers and presenting itself as a reliable, if transactional, regional actor.
Tehran, meanwhile, demonstrates resilience that is remarkable given international sanctions and economic pressures. Through ideological cohesion, proxy networks, and strategic partnerships with countries like China, Iran continues to exert influence across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. Its ability to maintain relevance under constant external pressure shows that control in the Middle East is not solely about resources or military bases. It is also about patience, adaptability, and the careful cultivation of relationships over time, ensuring Tehran remains a central player in regional dynamics.
When we consider these three powers together, it becomes clear that no single actor fully controls the Middle East. Instead, the region is shaped by a shifting triangle of influence, where Washington, Moscow, and Tehran interact indirectly through local actors, alliances, economic tools, and ideological networks. Each power has areas of strength and vulnerability, and each responds to the moves of the others. This interplay creates a dynamic, constantly evolving landscape in which dominance is relative, temporary, and often contested.
The complexity of this competition is further reinforced by local states and actors who resist external control. Gulf countries, Israel, and other regional powers leverage their own resources, alliances, and strategic initiatives to protect sovereignty and pursue interests independently. These actors do not simply follow the directives of global powers. They negotiate, resist, and sometimes play one external power against another. The result is a multi-layered environment in which influence is diffuse, negotiated, and always under contest, rather than controlled by a single actor.
Cultural, ideological, and soft power also play significant roles in shaping influence. The United States invests in education, media, and technology to reach regional populations. Russia emphasizes military prestige and alternative narratives through media. Iran projects religion, resistance, and identity-based cohesion. These efforts influence public opinion, political legitimacy, and long-term orientation of societies, adding another layer to the regional balance of power. Influence, therefore, extends beyond borders and military deployments into hearts, minds, and values.
Economics and energy remain central to influence as well. Control over oil flows, natural gas exports, and trade networks allows powers to project leverage in ways that complement military and diplomatic efforts. Washington, Moscow, and Tehran all use energy strategically, shaping markets and signaling power. Yet these tools are also limited by global interdependence, sanctions, and market fluctuations, meaning that dominance is never absolute. Influence is exerted incrementally, carefully, and through multiple channels simultaneously.
In the end, the story of the Middle East is less about outright control and more about continuous competition, negotiation, and adaptation. Each power, Washington, Moscow, and Tehran, has carved a niche, but each faces challenges and constraints. Shifting alliances, local resistance, and unpredictable global trends ensure that dominance is never fixed. The region is a theater of ongoing contestation, where influence is relative, temporary, and constantly renegotiated, reflecting the complex and fluid nature of Middle Eastern geopolitics.
So, as we conclude, it is clear that the Middle East is not controlled by a single superpower. Instead, it is a dynamic arena where multiple actors exert influence through military, economic, diplomatic, and cultural means. The region's strategic importance, rich resources, and complex social fabric ensure that competition is ongoing. Understanding the interplay among Washington, Moscow, and Tehran is essential for anyone seeking to grasp the challenges and realities of modern Middle Eastern geopolitics.
Indeed, Adam. The takeaway is that power in the Middle East is fluid, contested, and multidimensional. Rather than looking for a single controller, it is more accurate to see a constantly shifting balance of influence, where adaptability, networks, and strategic vision determine impact. The interplay of hard and soft power, ideology, economics, and diplomacy ensures that the region will remain an arena of global interest, tension, and competition for decades to come, illustrating the complexity of influence in today's world.